My name is Jessica Squires. Before we get started, I would just like to acknowledge that the land that we're meeting on is the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with the country. And I'd like to personally thank the Kaurna people for welcoming us into their country. My name is Jessica Squires, and I'm from Canada. I am the secretary of the Fund for the International Development of Archives, or FIDA, which is an ICA program, and I'm also the secretary for the Forum of National Archivists, and I work at Library and Archives Canada. I'm very pleased to introduce this panel and the speakers. I'm going to introduce all of the speakers, and then they're going to come up one at a time and make their presentations. And we've decided it would be good if we could collectively save our questions for after the presentations have been made. And they will come back up and answer the questions when the time comes. So our first speaker will be Alexander Barquero, who is the Director General of the National Archives of Costa Rica. He's leading the digital transformation process at the National Archives, and he comes to us with 2 master's degrees in related areas. Our second speaker will be Richard Foy, who is a futurist and a science fiction fan, and is the chief archivist at the Archives of New Zealand since 2018, and was previously the director of digital strategies, information and knowledge services at the Department of Internal Affairs, and has advised the National Library and the National Archives on digital strategy. And our third speaker will be Vilde Range, who is the director of the Norwegian Health Net, which is an organization that provides records management services to 10 agencies. She's also the vice chair of the Norwegian Society of Records Managers and Archivists, and is the chair of the ICA section of professional associations. So those are our speakers. Please help me welcome them, and they will come up.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. First of all, thank you all, and thank you to the organizers for the opportunity to be here and share a few ideas and a few words with you. It's been a beautiful, lovely days here in Adelaide, a first experience for me being in Australia, and for the small opportunities I have to share some of the ideas and our experiences with people all around the world who are convening here today, I realized that pretty much we all share the same problems in different scopes. And well, that's a bit of what I wanted to share today with you. And I got lucky, and I'm going first after this delicious lunch we had today. So it's my job to keep you awake for to be able to hear the next experiences we're going to have with our my dear friends in the presentations. This is our National Archive. This is a beautiful picture we have of the National Archive of Costa Rica. It's right in the middle of our capital in our country in San Jose. I first wanted to talk a bit about context. It's hard to understand how things work if you don't understand where they come from, right? So where's Costa Rica located in a map in the world? It's pretty much there in the red circle you can see. I can see it, I'm colorblind, but you can see it, right? I know it's red, that's what they told me. And if we try to understand the size of our country, it's a very small country. It's smaller than Tasmania. And I had to choose one place in the world that we could all relate. We're all here in Australia, so we can understand the scope. It's smaller than Tasmania. Costa Rica is only 51,000 square kilometers. We are 5 million people, and we have, in a small country, big world problems, like you all do. So when we're talking about what we experience or what we live in or what we're trying to achieve with archives, with history, with the memory of what we've done, and data of what we do right now, and the decisions we can take based on the data looking towards the future, we have to deal with our reality. And what's our reality like in Costa Rica? Well, first, we have limited resources. When I talk about limited resources, I'm talking about there's no money, and there's not enough people to do what we want to do. And every day that passes, we have less money and less people to do what we have to do, right? And it's in a financial situation we're in right now. This is gonna get harder and harder as each day passes. So we need a solution now for problems we still don't know we have, right? The second characteristic or particularity of my country is that we have a very complex digital divide situation in the country. And when I'm talking about complex digital divide situation, it's because we're not only talking about digital divide at a personal level. It's not only that certain people are good on using their iPhones and iPads and that other ones don't know about it. It's more like there's institutions that were built around technology, and there are others when you talk technology and they get scared about it, right? We even have a saying in Spanish. In Spanish, it's el papelito habla. If I had to translate it in English, it would be something like the paper speaks. You know, we built our whole trust system around papers. And when we talk about digital content and digital information, this collides completely with the way most people in decision-making positions in our country think about, right? And we have to deal with that too. We have bureaucracy. This is a problem in every part of the world, but especially in countries in Latin America that were built around their government and the capability of the government to hire people from the country. And it's something that's not going to change easily, but it's something we have to deal with. The resistance to change, the idea of changing from the paradigm of paper to electronic documents, it's something that's not easily digested by people who work in the public administration. We live in a politically unstable region. Luckily, Costa Rica is a place with a very long-standing democracy, and we're very stable and we're very peace-driven and all of those things. But the region is complicated, and this is something that always connects with us in a certain way or another. And the final problem, and I know that you've all heard about this, or even you've said it at certain point in your lives, is that no one is a prophet in their own land. It's very hard to believe the ideas, especially when they're very disrupting, the ideas and the strategies of changing when you're talking with people who live right next door, right? And it's hard to believe that they might know more or understand a bit more of what should be done, or where should you invest right now in a risky way to reap future rewards that we can't understand right now. And this is a reality for everyone, but it's especially more sensible in countries with this context, right? So I tried to give you a very quick scope of where I am right now, where I'm coming from, to tell you about this. Even with that in hand, our country has a really big challenge right now. And what's that challenge about? Well, it turns out there's a digital governance directive that was issued last year that forces that by December 2020, it means in 1 year, 75% of all the documents produced by the administration must be digital. I have to raise the hand and do I'm kind of guilty of this. I used to be the National Digital Governance Director, and this was made under my jurisdiction. But it was made precisely because if we don't establish these ambitious public policies, sometimes things don't change at all, right? And especially in countries when everyone is very happy on doing what they know how to do every day. And this really struck very sensible nerves around some very important people, but they are now running and trying to understand how to give a solution to this, how to respond to this demand, which is a policy demand issued by the president, right? The interesting thing about this, and I told you I'm the Director General of the National Archive, is at the end of the life cycle of all the documents that are produced by the public administration, around 10% of all of those documents end up in the National Archives because they get a permanent value declaration, right? So it's not only a problem for the institutions who have to deal with how to use these documents in their everyday, but it's also now a problem of the National Archive who needs to develop a solution to guarantee that you can preserve that for future use, right? And for future decision making and citizen researching and all of that, right? And well, so what have we done? When I started in my position a bit more than a year ago, a year and 4 days ago exactly, I asked my minister, the Minister of Culture, and I asked the president, well, I have lots of ideas, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and I'm going to need that much money, and that more people, and okay, that sounds really good, but you have to do it with exactly what you have right now. But can I do this? Nope. Can I get more? Nope. So what can I do? Embrace the opportunities. Be creative. That's what I've been asked to do. But that's what pretty much we all been asked to do where we are, right? And that's pretty much what we have been doing for years. And sometimes we get to do things right. And in Costa Rica, we have been able to do things right. A couple of things. Of course, everything is improvable, but there are certain things we can be proud of right now. And that's the idea of this presentation, to share with you in the way of 5 lessons, certain things we did in time in the past 20 years that might be of some use to you. Okay? So first, stretch your resources. You know what that means. It's spend wisely, make every coin count. We, in Spanish, we said, estirar el colón. Our money is called the colón, right? And we call about stretching it. And the way that we found out to do this is by reusing our existing solutions. So in our country, our central bank, like 20 years ago, they made this nationwide infrastructure, technological infrastructure, and they linked every bank. We have like a nationwide network that links. Banks are forced to connect to this infrastructure, and every bank, be it public or private in our country, is already connected to this secure infrastructure. And this is where this is why in our country it's really easy to send money from one bank to another, or it's really easy to catch a check, or it's really easy to change money that has been deteriorated by time. It's because every financial institution is connected. And it's all managed by the central bank. So when we try to deploy, electronic documents, you need something to manifest will, and normally use digital signatures or electronic signatures. I used to be the national director of electronic signatures. So when we tried to develop this, and we knew that we have to issue electronic signatures for everyone in the country, we wanted to do it with a very high quality, but the cheapest possible cost, right? And then we saw that the banks were already connected. And in some of your countries, I know that this is done by the local governments. In other countries, this is done by the tax agencies. In other countries, this is done even by the police. But in our country, this is done by the banks. Because what we did is that we went to each bank, we knocked on their doors, and we told them, this might be even good for the financial system. If we manage to massify this mechanism, you're going to be able to give a secure way to users, to citizens, to your clients, to access your bank services online. Back when we were starting to think about online banking. And when we did this, they liked the idea, right? And then they open up the whole bank infrastructure to be able to deliver digital certificates to citizens. So that means that when you go and get a digital certificate, which is the last process we want every citizen to be able to do in the physical world, after that we want everyone to do electronic relationships with the government. But when you go and do that in particular, the place you're going to do it is in a bank. And the bank already has security officers. And the bank already has a brick and mortar secure structure and cameras and people that know how to deal with sensible content and private information rules and setups. So we reused all of that to issue our digital signature solution to our citizens. And it got very cheap, very, very cheap. And this was the first decision that we made that made it sound nice. And when I'm saying here, make it attractive, the original word was sexy, but I didn't want to put sexy there, but I'm saying it right now. So make it, people trust financial institutions, right? Pretty much everyone has their money on the bank. Well, not exactly everywhere, but it's safer. At least most people perceive a safer place, a bank, than any other public institutions, right? Because they manage their money. They're the ones who manage their salary and everything. Wow, my time is running out. So this worked. This worked for us. It sounded really good. It sounded sexy for people. And it made the transition to using electronic signature as a mechanism a fast thing, which stretched our resources, which are very limited. The other thing is go with the flow. And we're not going to invent the wheel. Being second or being third in line is a good thing sometimes, because you have the opportunity to copy the ones who have done it already better than you, or who have done it good and not imitate what they didn't do that well. And I don't know if you can see this picture. There's a shark, and those around the shark are called the remora fishes, or the sucker fish, right? The sucker fish works by attaching itself to a shark who is faster, who can traverse longer lengths, to be able to move faster, right? And we've done that quite a few times. We've copied stuff from Estonia, from Belgium, from Brazil, from the US, from the UK, from Australia, because we need to do things better, because we don't have that much margin of experimenting that other countries do have, right? And it is never a recipe. We cannot copy it face by face or topic by topic, but we tropicalize it. We take what works and we bring it to our own context. And we did this with all our policy regarding electronic documents. And we use the same standards that the EDC at the European Union uses, because we realized they were good. And we investigated, we had some academical processes regarding that, and then we started using them. And it has worked for us. Strategy is your project safety net. If you want something to survive when you are gone, you have to link it to something else. And we are a political-driven country like every other country, and sometimes technical criteria is not exactly the way that the decisions are made, right? But if you link it to strategic products that are larger than a government, it works. And so last year we made this strategy, national strategy called the Digital Transformation Strategy towards the Bicentennial Costa Rica 4.0. It's a huge name. It's because in 2 years, Costa Rica is going to be 200 years old. And we made a national digital transformation strategy. I was in charge of that project. And then I made sure that there's at least 4 things that have to do with archives and the way digital archives could help our country be better at what it does, right? And we ended up inserting what we're doing right now in a bigger picture, and we're making sure that the stakeholders, the ones who make the decisions, look good in the picture, right? Sometimes all you need to get some support for certain politicians and decision makers is putting them in the picture, right? And making sure they look nice in that picture. And it has worked a lot for us. And the other one is a phrase I love, It's that perfect is the enemy of good. You know, you want everyone to be in the party, but you don't want everyone planning the party, right? Because if you have everyone planning the party, sometimes the party is going to be a mess because everyone has a different idea or whatever, and sometimes you have to be creative on how to tell them, no, wait, you're going to be a main guest in our party, but don't worry about that. We're going to be in charge of it. We're going to make it sure that it's going to be a nice party, and you're going to be there, and you're going to have your spot too, and your spotlight too. But not have everyone in the planning, because that won't go well. We had some experiences of public consultation of policies that didn't go the right way, and then we decided to build a better idea of a project and have it a bit digested before we presented it to the public, and this has worked really well for us. So it's a good idea. And this 80-20, this Pareto example, it's because sometimes having something good costs you 20% of your time. But having something excellent, it's a lot more time and effort that you need to put into it. And sometimes you only need something good. Because remember that nothing is permanent. You can do continuous improvement on it, right? And certain policy instruments, you better have something right now and not wait for the perfect instrument. And this is difficult to understand from a technical point of view. I'm an information scientist. I'm a computer scientist in a world of archivists. I have to say that as a disclaimer. But it's sometimes technically incorrect to do this, but it makes things happen, right? Sometimes you want to have the policy first, and then you can improve on the policy that people know already exists. Otherwise, no one's gonna do the things right. And finally, convince first, enforce later. People don't like to be forced to do things. You need to convince them first. And this is a vehicle to having the people who are most in tune with what you do start working with you sooner. Right? Because when you're convincing, you quickly realize who thinks the way that you think, or who's gonna get on board with you and your project before everyone else. And you want them first. You want your first goals to be quick and easy. You want the fruits that are hanging lower, right? And then you go after the others by forcing them. Okay. Simplify your message, bulletproof your projects with research. Technical research is always important. Show some numbers. This is, people believe in things when they are supported by data. And this is an example. This is the cost it's gonna take to have 4 years of our National Digital Archive project, $3 million, versus $13 million, which is the cost of the paper way of doing things that we have right now. And you don't have to preach to the choir. You have to preach with the choir. Make them a part of your effort. If there's people who already believe in your project, have them be a part of the project. And this works. And finally, this is the big, beautiful logo of our National Digital Archive project that we're doing right now. I'd love to tell you more about it in a different moment. Thank you so much for your attention.
Inga mana, inga reo, ranga tēnā mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko e te aroa te whenua, ko Rimotaka Tūmaunga, ko Rongoron te awa, ko Wang Akso, Wang Hing, Wang Hingfun toko te puna no haina ia, ko Ngāti Siep toko iwi, ko Richard Foy aho, ko Wang Guokfi toko unga tūturu, ko o te tūmuaki o te roa mahara o te kā wanatanga. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora, Adelaide 2019. It's very nice to be here. And that was a really fascinating discussion about what you're doing in Costa Rica. By way of just introduction to myself, many of you don't know who I am, so it was said in the introduction. My guess, though, is that you've looked at me and you've sort of had a look at various aspects of me, and you've probably figured out where I'm from. And you'd be right. I'm from Australasia. Which is Australia and New Zealand, and in particular, the most important part of Australasia, which is, lost a bit of, I'm clicking and it's not moving, sorry. There we go, thank you. So from the capital of New Zealand, which is in Wellington, the capital city. They're just adjusting the controller up there. I belong to a group called the AA, so I'm what you'd call an accidental archivist, even though I'm the chief archivist for New Zealand. So I find myself somewhat accidentally serving and leading our national institution. I am a long-term digital native, like my colleague Alexander, so there's a bit of evidentiary proof of that. And my talk today is in this together, and I've co-authored this with my colleague Denise Williams, who's in there, somewhere in the background there, helping out. The basis of the talk was really to talk about some of the drivers which are leading Archives New Zealand on its strategy and journey going forward. And so I really wanted to sort of set the bit of context, as Alexander did earlier, around our National Archives. Our context started really on the 29th of July 1952 when a large fire took hold in a building called the Hope Gibbons Building in the centre of Wellington. It was a very special building because that was where many government records were held back in the day. But it was not a very good building, it was not particularly well looked after, and obviously it caught fire. After the conflagration of that building, we really can see that archives and our National Archives effectively rose up like a phoenix out of that with the Archives Act of 1957. Most of the records were destroyed in that fire, but we do have some survivors and we still have those within our holdings. That Archives Act of 1957 begat the Public Records Act of 2005 that I now administer as Chief Archivist. And people often talk about burning platforms. The Hope Gibbons fire was literally our real burning platform for our National Archives. Today we're faced with what we might consider to be more of a perfect storm, not just a single burning platform, but a number of drivers and factors that are leading us to need to change. So the perfect storm today is a little bit different. I want to take you back to 2010, actually, to kind of introduce you to that perfect storm and one of the key factors. My partner and I were waiting for something very important to arrive into our world, something very small, perfectly formed, delicate, precious to us. You could say we were expectant, and you probably guessed it. We were waiting for the Apple iPad to come about. Actually, that was 3 years after the iPhone, which obviously heralded a major change in digital consumer technology, connected to an internet, providing people with easy access to digital content and services. But that's not the key change I'm really talking about. The change I really am truly talking about is the expectation of the birth of my daughter Lucy. Because Lucy, and she's at the tender age of 9 now, she really represents for me the type of driver that we need to be changing our services for, because she's growing up in a fundamentally different world, in a fundamentally different way than the customers and researchers we currently serve today. And if I combine her as a very typical millennial and a digital citizen, plus the iPads and the smartphones and the global internet, I get a truly disruptive force which drives archives forward. But I have to ask, we talked about public trust and trusted institutions, do I think that Lucy will trust her government in the future? And what are the things that might stop her? At the moment in New Zealand, we are very fortunate in that we have great trust in our government. So these are statistics from Transparency International. We're number 2, just under Denmark, which isn't bad, but we're way better than Australia. But we shouldn't rest on our laurels, because some recent information, this is as recent as 2017, which talked about the trust and confidence in various professions who work in government, across government, and public servants, of which I am one and of which my staff are one, are on that lower end of the trusted professions. And there's even cartoons which talk about this notion of civil servants and public servants not being particularly trusted. And it's true, we live in a post-truth world. We talked about that earlier this morning, and truth is a very subjective thing. But what I'm probably more concerned about is us moving into a post-trust world. And it's a world that's even been discussed about in terms of how digital platforms are going to work in the future. So Mark Zuckerberg spoke recently about how he felt it was not his responsibility for Facebook to not put out fake news through political ads. And of course, democracy, which is really the threat of all these sort of factors, is very much in the public eye at the moment. And this is just a good example of that. So in New Zealand, the Public Records Act gives me certain powers, but it's a thing that we know a good democracy requires, which is good record keeping and good archives. And we know that good governance and good government means the production of many, many records. So it's not unexpected that the archives of New Zealand, which are currently sitting at about 143 linear kilometres of archives, we expect that to grow. And by about 2045, the mid-2040s, we expect to reach what we think is peak paper. But on the other side of the things, we also are worried about that which we are not collecting, where the digital record that is actually out there in agencies today, which are potentially being lost. Vince Cerf talked about it as a digital dark age, but I think actually he probably meant a digital winter. And it's kind of a paradox that we have both a growth business in terms of physical and digital, and yet we also worry about the loss that's actually going to come to the record and the archive. And then of course, what about machines when they start using big data and they start using algorithms to make decisions that affect the rights and entitlements of citizens? How do we hold those machines and those algorithms accountable? Because we're really good at holding documents, we're starting to be better about holding data. Are we going to be good enough at holding algorithms and software so that we can look at decisions that have been made in the past? Now, we don't have to address this ourselves in New Zealand. We work quite closely with the Government Chief Digital Officer, the Data Steward, and the Privacy Officer to really help create an overall accountable digital government for the future. And we've also got our own strategy, something we call Archives 2057, or Te Rautaki Rua Kawanatanga 2057. And it's very much a future-focused strategy. Why 2057? It's probably pretty obvious if you were paying attention. 1957, First Archives Act, plus 100 years gives us 2057. And we have a very particular vision for what we want Archives New Zealand to be in the future for citizens. We want it to be trusted. We want to be a strong, powerful regulator. We want to have experts within our midst, to be a gateway to information and knowledge and history that will connect people to their rights, their entitlements, and to their stories. We have three themes. The first is taking archives of the people, which is finding those digital channels and having a much broader, deeper reach into people's lives to be much more meaningful and relevant, and also to reach those who have not had connection to us, especially Māori and iwi. We want to ensure that upholding transparency is done in a digital age, regardless of the fact that we don't have paper records, but we're now starting having digital records out there in organisations. And we understand that in a digital age where networks are paramount, that you can't do any of these things without building systems together. We can't dictate this on our own terms. But it's fundamentally centred on this understanding that we are in transition, that we're moving from a physical information age to a digital information age. I asked one of our experts around digital transfers about how we might do digital disposal going in the future. And you know, he's always sort of telling me, this is Mick Crouch, that we need to do more. I asked him, can you simplify this future for us so I can share it with ICA and ASA? He drew me this picture. Mick no longer works for archives. So we need to fundamentally rethink how we do disposal, and we need to do it at a macro level. We need to do it in the digital world as well. We're nowhere near close enough to that, but we've got a project starting to look at it. We've got a new audit and monitoring program that's kicking into gear right now. We've just completed our annual information management survey of hundreds of public offices in New Zealand. And we're going to develop an IM maturity model that's going to help us have not just the baseline, but also what the future is going to look like, to see whether the system's actually improving in terms of the state of government record keeping. Fundamentally, though, we need to also have a better way of relating and engaging with the public officers that we regulate and the customers and researchers that we serve. Recently, we updated our website. This was one of the very first steps in terms of taking archives to the people to create a much better citizen and user-centred channel for service delivery. That will one day become our primary channel of service delivery beyond our physical reading rooms. It's customer-centred because we actually spoke to people, we asked what their needs were, we studied them. It's got a Te Ao Māori worldview, which means we understand how Māori might want to connect with this channel, and is to ensure that our content is also surfaced up in multiple languages. And it's very much a web accessibility or standards-based offering. So that means that I can use my mobile phone, which is my preferred way to access the web, and I can see it just as well as I can on a desktop. Which is not what I can say for our core legacy archives management system called Archway, which is kind of unusable on a mobile device. Looks great on a desktop, not so good. So we've got a major program and project called AIMS, which is an archival information management system, and that's going to be the successor to Archway, and we're hoping to get that signed up with the vendor actually by the end of the month to get that project really running at full steam. We've got a program, and Denise has been leading this in terms of digitalisation at scale. It's probably not quite at scale as what I heard earlier in terms of the University of Adelaide, but it's digitising both for preservation, it's doing it for digital delivery and access, and we're even doing it on demand and by request. We've learned how to do this over the last couple of years. We've learned to take some of that into other work that we're doing around the Royal Commission of Inquiry, which is providing much greater access and need for digital delivery. And talking about that, we're using the powers of the Chief Archivist in a way to protect and preserve the integrity of the record. So we currently have a Royal Commission of Inquiry in New Zealand, and we've I've made decisions to not deliver those records back to responding agencies in paper or physical form, but to only deliver that digitally so that I can ensure that the record is preserved and we can maintain the integrity of it. And finally, we are taking real account of the fact that of all the holdings we hold, many of them contribute to what we call Matauranga Maori, which is the total knowledge and information and wisdom of Māori and iwi, who are our Indigenous people of New Zealand. We contribute to that. We are kaipupiri for very important information, what we would call taonga, precious treasures for Māori. So we have an obligation under the Treaty of Waitangi to look after it. We have also, I think, human rights obligations to just do that well. Many New Zealanders, many Māori have what you would call whakapapa, which is your genealogical connection back into the public record. So we must ensure that that is preserved and is made accessible. But we also have to consider the sovereignty elements of that. So we have decided not to do things like putting that data into the cloud as yet, because we don't have the social license or the cultural license to enable that. And we have to work on partnership as two equal partners in a joint program to make this work better. And through Māori metadata, descriptive metadata, we hope to provide new ways for researchers and New Zealanders to find access into our holdings, not just through the standard archival mechanisms we've provided in the past, but to provide whakapapa based things. So, you know, based on the mountain they're close to, the land they're from, the river they're close to, their tupuna or their ancestors, use different connections and pathways into that information. In terms of what needs to change for us internally, we can't change these things on the outside without changing something about us on the inside. We need to have a much clearer sense of what we would call Kaupapa Maori, which is the way we integrate tikanga Māori practice, ritual, process from the Māori worldview into our work practices, whether that's use of language or certain rituals. We obviously need to increase the capabilities of our staff in terms of digital and data and be far more conversant with that beyond the physical. Human design, so ensuring that everything we design in whatever channel and processes in the back end, that they are human-centered from the outset, because it's people who are either part of the process or serving the process. And we need to improve our capabilities as regulators and to understand what good regulatory practice is in an archival sense. Bowie said it, we just need to focus on change. I want to finish on the physical side of things. We've done some amazing things with our 3 constitutional documents over the last few years in terms of preserving them and making them accessible in a permanent exhibition called He Tohu, which is hosted at the National Library, and we're very proud of it. But those are only 3 archival artefacts that we have provided that level of preservation and care for. I have millions in our holdings in those 4 archival repositories around the country. Our central repository in Wellington, our largest, is shown in this video here. It's that building in the distance there, Archives House on Mulgrave Street. A 55-year building that was originally built to be the government printing office that was then converted to be an archive. So not a purpose-built archive for us. Now, if you're looking at that picture, you probably notice there's a big hole in the ground. You get holes in the ground in New Zealand because we have earthquakes, and so we have to demolish buildings. What could you put in there, you wonder? Well, we have some hopes, we have some dreams, we have some ambitions, and plans that's going on right now under a program that we call Preserving the Nation's Memory, a new home for our archives in Wellington, the capital of New Zealand. What do we call a whare taonga, where a home for taonga. And this is a conceptual architectural diagram here. The yellow outline there is where my current archival repository is, that old building, Soviet era building, and just across the road would be where we would hope to build the new archives. And it will be what we hope to be a stunning building if all goes well. I'm not counting my chickens until it's there. So anyway, that's one day what we hope to have as our new archival home. And I think it would be fitting as the crown in a very important democratic institution for New Zealand, not merely a culture and heritage institution. Yes, we hold cultural artifacts, we hold cultural documents, we hold archives that obviously connect you back to a social and cultural place in the world, but we also hold evidence, which is part of our constitutional role as an archives, and therefore we are a democratic institution, and it's probably befitting that we have a democratic institution that looks as good as this. Thank you.
Dear all, I am so happy to be talking to you, and I'll give you a fun fact about that in just a minute. First, I have to tell you why my paper has this title. In 2004, the French author Anna Gavalda published her 3rd novel called Ensemble c'est tout. In Norwegian, the title is this one, Together We Are Less Alone. I love that title, and by the way, it's a good book too. And I chose it here for 3 reasons. Our profession needs our network, this network, nationally and internationally. The challenges are too great to be dealt with alone. Our profession also needs to think the whole value chain of documentation, from the very left when it's being created, and all the way up to the right when that same documentation ends up in an archival institution, and along the way we need to include people with other competencies than ourselves: architecture, privacy, information security, technology. Finally, and that's why I'm primarily what I'll be talking about today, is how small teams can benefit from being larger entities, and how we work with this in the Norwegian Health Net sector. Now to the fun fact. I was asked about a week ago if I could do this talk. I don't know if you're familiar with the term improv, often used when describing a form of instant theater where nothing is decided beforehand and the audience is invited to shout out and influence how the acting shall proceed. So, I hereby invite you to the first ever Improv Records and Information Management talk. Although I do have a plan, so since I only been given 20 minutes, please save the shouting for the end. This is what I'm planning on covering. I'll give you a quick tour of records information management in Norway. I'll tell you about where I work and how we work. And finally, I'll say something about how I think this is our era, if we want it to be. First, I'll give you the promised quick tour. I'm sure you're all excited. And the tour consists of 3 important words to describe the framework we are working within in Norway. First, it's the journal. In 1740, due to some financial misconduct in the municipality of Bergen, King Christian VI issued a royal decree and sent it up to Norway from his throne in Copenhagen. The decree said that all public organizations in the country had to start logging all incoming and outgoing letters in a journal. The journal had to contain the date of the letter, the sender or receiver, and a short description of the content. And what do you know? These metadata are still mandatory by law. 2. NOARC, the standard. Today's log or journal is not a book but a database. And the entire public sector has to use, bound by the Archives Act, a system that fulfills the NOARC standard, or Norwegian Archival Standard, as their journal. All documents must be registered there, regardless of where they were created. The NOARC standard is developed and owned by the National Archives, and there are mainly 3 systems in use in the public sector today, so there's not a lot of competition or innovation. NOARC has done wonders for records and information management in Norway, from it first came out in the mid-1980s and up until perhaps late 1990s. 3. Transparency. Having access to information is a very important principle in our democracy. The digital journal is therefore available online. Every day, the public sector in Norway has to post their journals on this website for all to see. It basically works like any other online store. You can search for documents by using the metadata fields and click on the Add to Shopping cart when you find a document you would like to see, and then you automatically send a request for information. And there are no questions asked to why you are requesting the document. All you need is an email address and access to internet to use this service. Whether you get access to the document is another business, but the threshold is high for the agencies to turn them down. Perfect! In theory, that is. In the reality is that we're failing big time. Records are no longer just letters. Most of the time they are just data, and our whole system is rigged for handling paper. The world is much different than in 1740 when King Christian made it mandatory to have a journal, or in 1984 when the first NOARC standard came out. Technology, volume, formats, new ways of communicating, very little fits into these 3 steps. 1, the journal, 2, the standard, 3, transparency. We try to compensate by electrifying paper, a new phrase in the Norwegian language. We do everything like we used to, just using, when we had paper, just using digital tools. We haven't started to work digitally, like really digitally. A lot of us are reluctant to change. Things tend to move slowly in the public sector, and also the current framework, as I've described it, does not allow it. The reality, therefore, which is not unique for us, of course, is statistics like this, that per 1 terabyte of documentation in the records management system, there is 25 terabytes of documentation, other places where unstructured documentation is stored. We have a recent example from Norway to support those numbers. The Auditor General of Norway wanted to investigate records management practices in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs 2 years ago, and went into their services and servers and executed enterprise searches. One of them was the phrase China and relations. They got these hits: 244 files in the NOARC system, 175 files on shared drives, and almost 1 million files on the Outlook server. Who said email was dying? then it really doesn't help that we are so transparent that all of our journals are accessible online for everyone to search in, if it's only 244 files out of a possible almost 1 million files who are out there. And I know they may not all be records, but the gap is too vast for us to ignore. NOARC is a standard developed from an archival perspective. It is the traditional way of thinking of archives and records management, something happening on the side, not as an integrated part of an organization and their work processes and workflow. You have to come to us and use our system, we say to our users, instead of the other way around. To describe and file one record in the NOARC system we use in my organization, these are the stats: 41 clicks, 9 metadata fields for one document. So I sent 1,700 emails in the past 2 months. Assuming 5% of them were interesting and considered records, that equals 3,485 clicks and 765 metadata fields to be completed. Further assumptions, if I spend 1 minute per email, that equals 58 hours or 1.5 weeks over 2 months. So, what to do? Norway is a digital society, no question about it. We were ranked number 5 in Europe in 2018 in the Digital Economy and Society Index. This year, we got our first Minister of Digitalisation, such a hard word. Hardly anyone has cash anymore, and there's an app for everything. When it comes to legislation and NOARC, both are under revision, and earlier this year, a governmental appointed committee sent out a proposal for a new act on archives. The deadline for the public consultation is December 2nd. In the professional association where I'm vice chair, we are eagerly working on our reply, literally as we speak. We're hoping for a change and making it possible to innovate the way we handle documentation in the public sector. This is Erna Solberg. She's the Prime Minister of Norway. Her conservative government says that the public administration needs to innovate, simplify, and improve. In comes Norwegian Health Net, where I am a director, a corporation owned by the Ministry of Health and Care Services. We are primarily an IT company, and our main task is to provide a secure infrastructure for the entire Norwegian healthcare sector. Our digital highway enables information to follow the patient through their treatment process while ensuring that the information is not compromised. In 2018, approximately 210 million medical messages were sent via our net from pharmacies to doctors, from dentists to hospitals, and so forth. 210 million messages is quite a high number considering we are 5 million inhabitants in our country. Due to Erna's, our Prime Minister's wishes, we started to look into widening our scope to include administrative services. 2 years ago, we started as a service provider within IT and procurement, and June 1st last year, we started to deliver services within archives and records management. The societal goals are more efficient services and at reduced cost, larger and sturdier professional units, and higher quality in administrative services. Basically, doing more and better for less. June last year, the Department of Archives and Records Management was established in the Norwegian Health Net. 25 people working with records management moved from the agencies to us, got a new employer and a new address. From day one, we were up and running. Today, there are 40 people in my team, and I would guess one of the largest records management teams in Norway. This allows us to be an engine for development and innovation in a totally different way than the previous teams of 1, 2, or 5 records managers in one agency. Our customers are 10 federal agencies in the health sector, representing approximately 4,000 end users. So what services do we offer? We offer mailroom. It's all about the physical mail. We're talking documents in the traditional way, paper. Don't know about you guys, but there is still so much paper. at least in the health sector in Norway. The 10 agencies are not getting their mail to their home addresses anymore. We get it. We open it, sort it, scan, and make the documents available on a secure portal for the agencies to harvest. 6 of the 41 people work in our mailroom. The other service is Archives and Records Management, which covers everything else. 6 of the agencies are full-service customers, 4 of them just mailroom customers. But they might be on their way in 2020, and our team will be almost 70. The agencies are still responsible for their records and their journal, meaning they cannot outsource the actual responsibility. This is stated very clear in the Archives Act. But they can outsource the daily operations. So now you know a little about the framework, about the demand for doing more for less, and our department. We are a young department, so of course everything is not in place yet. Still, there is an underlying expectations amongst our customers and our owners that the records management services magically turn around 360 degrees just because the records management team got a new address. It became evident that we had to do something fast and make a plan for action. So the first thing is, look at your service, like really look at it. Put it under the microscope, use a magnifying glass. What is it? Dissect. So much of what we do is so random. We do it because somebody asked us to do it. Not because it's a natural part of records management, not because we have made an aware decision that yes, this falls into our responsibility. At least that's how it is in Norway. There are many reasons for this situation. A lot of it is our own fault, in my opinion. And also, we are often a sidetrack in the organization and not an integrated part of business. In June last year, we sat there and were suddenly responsible for providing efficient records management services to lots of agencies. And the message from our Ministry of Health was very clear: do more and better for less. The answer to that is standardization. But before we could standardize, we had to find out more about ourselves. 25 people were transferred, and we needed to know who they were and what they knew. After a competency mapping, we found our gaps and made a plan for closing those. We have five full-service customers, and we took over the records management services as is. But what was as is? We went in and made a detailed description of each of the records management services, and we communicated the starting point to our customers so that we all agreed on what we took over last year. And yes, the goal is to improve, but it doesn't happen overnight. Deconstruct. I like watching cooking shows on TV. My all-time high is MasterChef Australia. I love that show. My favorite exercise to watch is when they deconstruct classic dishes. When they take something we all know what is, or at least we think so, and make it into something else, but still containing the same flavors. This is an apple pie, or it looks like an apple pie. The picture doesn't say anything about what's inside or what it tastes like. Visually, it tells you one thing, but under the surface, the truth can be so totally different. And I think we need to do the same with our services. Break down all the components, find out exactly what the content is, and make it better. With the true flavors, refined and back to the roots without the extras and the fuss. We have to be proud of what we do, recreate and present in a new form, describe clearly what the service is and what it isn't, and we have to make sure that we do the right things and the things right. When we started to provide the mailroom service last year, it became evident very fast that standardization was necessary. The 10 agencies had a mile-long list of requirements that we needed to fulfill in order to make them happy. There are so many routines in our records management services. Little adjustments that have built up over time because somebody asked us to, making perhaps the focus less clear of what our core processes should contain. We have now standardized the mailroom service. We had to compromise along the way, but it's okay. We are in process and Rome wasn't built in one day. What's for sure is that there's no profit solely in getting a joint address. Moving all the records management teams under one roof We need to go deeper and set the standard for routines, equality, and requirements. The records management team need to toughen up and make lists of requirements for themselves. This we do, this we don't. This will allow us to move forward and concentrate on developing our services. We also need to be very clear when describing our services. What does a basic records management service include, and what is considered extra? And what does the extra cost? Also, instead of just accepting a new task or a project, and it doesn't matter how fun and interesting we think it sounds, we need to clarify that this is something that comes in addition to what we are already doing and must be treated that way. Don't break your back in trying to do both. Nobody will thank you, and the danger is that both tasks will suffer. Be bold. Speak out about the issues where you are the expert. When the agencies themselves had the records management team in-house, many of them didn't care much about them. Now, on the other hand, when the agencies get an invoice, they come back and they say, what is this? What is that? It's really great, and we're really taking advantage of that momentum. And always remember, we are service providers and they are customers. We are two equal parts in a partnership. And when we think of ourselves as service providers, we will get better at selling our services, knowing what we are selling. But it takes time to change the mindset and become a good service provider, in the same way that it also takes an effort to becoming a good customer. Give it time and be equally generous towards each other. Managing information and records is an essential part of any organization, more and more so. It's not about us, though, we who have been put in charge of providing that service. It's about business needs and about people, and about making sure that we are a relevant resource and support for our agencies when they work on reaching their goals and societal missions. We cannot be just administrators, executors, or naggers. We need to be strategic partners in information governance. And this really is our era. We're in the spotlight. This is my daughter, by the way. People are exposed to the importance and relevance of good archives and records management practice everywhere these days. But it's up to us to take advantage of the fact. Since I'm a turtle nerd, I collect references from TV shows and movies, and I'll end my presentation with a few of those. In Norway, all non-Norwegian shows come with subtitles, and then it's even more explicit. But still, this shows you our visibility. It's right there, even though you can't read the language. This is from The Crown. It's a Nazi getting rid of classified documentation at the end of the war in the Crown. As we know, there is much power in controlling records. This is from Monster, a Norwegian crime series. Scene after scene in front of filing cabinets where the detective and our hero searches for the answers to serious crimes. Blade Runner 2049, the whole plot is about the blackout that takes out most of the memory of society, and the heroes and the villains are hunting for the little fragments of digital records that are left and that can tell them who they are and where they come from. The detective in The Sinner is happy because he has come across a record that had been stolen from the police files. And Game of Thrones, oh my. The references are endless. That's really our show, people. Here's Sansa is wondering how long the last winter lasted, and her advisor says he will check for the answer in Meister Lewin's Archives of Ravens. It's beautiful. I like this Australian police officer because he refers to the files as not just the paper files, but also the databases. And finally, even kids get information about the important functions of archives and records management. Here, Paddington the bear says, we have to check the archives to know for sure. Thank you.
Questions or comments are both welcome. Maybe I'll just start by noting that I thought it was very strong connections between the three presentations. We saw a lot of content about the drivers of change. We saw a lot of content about changing paradigms, and we saw a lot of contributions in the form of very pragmatic solutions in the realm of record-keeping experiences in a changing world, a world that's been changing for decades and we expect to keep changing for decades to come. A lot of really interesting commonalities. Any questions?
Thank you. Question for you, Richard, hiding behind. I was just wondering, for you, Richard.
Yes.
Just wondering if there's anything you could tell us about, I think you were saying that your online catalogue, you're going to be redeveloping it, and I just wondered if there was anything you could tell us about that.
Can't say too much because we haven't quite signed the deal, but by the end of the month we expect to sign with the vendor and have some people come and visit us in November to start doing the very detailed requirements, sort of workshopping. But in the past, Archway has been a bespoke, custom-built system. I think it's about 15 years old, so it's kind of getting on. Not only is it not functionally able to be enhanced for what we wanted to do in the future, but it's getting to the point in terms of technological obsolescence. So it's the right time to find something that we can get effectively off the shelf that we can configure for what we need, that will be able to serve our needs in the digital channel, and would also support our desires around the sort of Māori metadata worldview to provide different pathways of access into the holdings.
I think I saw a question. Okay, yeah, go ahead.
It's a question for Vilda, and I was fascinated that public servants have to upload their documents every day, because I think if that happened in Australia, there'd be just severe conniptions. In Australia and other countries, we have freedom of information laws where people can apply to look at government documents. Is there such a regime in Norway, or it's not necessary because you have that system?
Yeah, but the law, we have the exact same law, and that's what's behind the solution where you can search online. But and I know, since I'm engaged in ICA, I know that people are like doing the wave because it's so transparent. But my point is that it's a very limited amount of documents that are actually in there. So the clue is to get more, because the law is there and the solution is there. It's just how to capture the documentation that should be put out there. Also, there is mainly metadata that you can search for, but it is possible also to put full documents in the solution.
Yeah, Kuldaros, National Archives of Estonia. Just wondering, when we are talking about change in archives and archiving, and there has been a lot of talk recently about things like nanosecondary archiving by design, which basically means that which imply that the future archivist is actually changed from a collector and preservationist into more a consultant who is going around agencies or the data creators and offering advice on how to build their data creation workflows in a way that the data is preserved, regardless of the place of the storage and the preservation environment. What do you see from your institutional perspective? How much is that already happening in your institutions, and what do you think, where are we going in 5 to 10 years?
So the question was, I think, if I got it all, is essentially about the evolution of digital workflows. To what extent has innovation really set in terms of the workflows that are present in the institutions in question? Okay, so it's more about the archival practice evolving with the new digital context and being more concerned upstream, right? Okay, any answers there?
Sure. That's a good question. I mean, that whole kind of thing of distributed custody is something that I think a lot of jurisdictions are thinking about. We probably still see ourselves primarily as a place for records to be disposed of and transferred to become permanent archives. I don't see that role going away. We certainly do provide advice from time to time to people who want to know how to do that themselves, but our legislation does have certain requirements about things being sent to us after a certain period of time. Now, that probably needs to be reviewed based on digital record keeping, and therefore transfer times probably being a lot shorter. And I think it doesn't mean that we wouldn't want to think about how access might be provided at the point of creation back in agencies. But you kind of get into this interesting thing where you might be expecting organisations, public offices to self-regulate, and therein can lie in some problems. Again, if you treat them too much as customers and not as regulated parties, that can also lead to the kind of wrong relationship. So I think we've got some way to go before we would trust the system to look after everything for the future. But we can only dream, I suppose.
Yes, I would like to add something on that idea too. And this strikes me as a very interesting question because there's the theory and there's the practice, right? In theory, and this is something archivists around the world have been talking about for a while now, certain roles surrounding the work of formal archivists are going to change drastically in the coming ages. And it's not going to be something that might be planned. In certain cases, it will happen before we were even starting to plan for it, right? For instance, document description. Okay, so document description is something that every archivist has done at least once in their life, right? But document description doesn't make that much sense when you're building data-centric infrastructure instead of document-centric infrastructure and services, right? Because the idea of describing a document changes completely when you can have computers solve that problem for you and probably identify the way that documents relate between themselves even better than a human can do it, right? And this is a reality with all big data and data science and all of those things that are surrounding the activities we do as a profession. And so we've been talking about this at the university. I'm also a teacher at a university in our country that is the only one that has the career of archival sciences. And there's this thing that there's an opportunity, I have to say it this way, there's an opportunity for whoever gets there first as a profession will be in charge of those tasks. And when we talk about data science and when we talk about information sciences as a whole, there's a huge opportunity for archivists and people in charge of archives, not always archivists, right, to upgrade their tool sets so they can be relevant and actually give more to what we can get from this challenge and this change of paradigm that's coming right at the end of the corner, right? And when you ask how we could deal with this, well, we have a similar situation to what my colleague from New Zealand said. The law forces us to do certain tasks, and there are certain things that we can't avoid, and that's why we keep doing them right like they are right now. But you know that all governments are thinking about how we can change the law to make things more efficient every day, and we might not even be asked if this is the best way to do it when the law is coming. And we might raise our hands, we might be scared about something that might change completely the way we do things, but we're not necessarily there writing the new laws and the new rules of how things should be done. And what you asked, I would like to return the question to you. I mean, as an archivist, as a professional that you know and you've been working for years in that field doing that specific thing, what would you do I'm a computer scientist. I already said that, and I'm very new to the world of archivists. But I'm pretty sure, and I've met with lots of people already who have lots of insights of how data and data process, technological-driven processes should change so that information can still be valuable and still be searchable and still be preserved in time. But we have to set those rules now, and we have to say something about it now, because when it changes and it doesn't take us into account, it might be very hard to come back to something we can give back to, right?
Thank you. John Beaverstock, All Saints College, Western Australia. Alexander, you made a passing reference to disposal of documents, and I find that in my work I am now putting everything, I'm digitising it, I'm putting in, for example, items that will be that are due for destruction 75 years after the person's date of birth, as is now the case in schools. I find there's a temptation, although I won't need to do it, it's so far ahead, there's a temptation that perhaps one won't want to bother with disposing documents because are they going to be there forever, or is it important that we do look at disposal schedules and stick to them?
Fine. Yeah, there's a bit of an echo up here. I think the question is essentially about how important will disposition of records be in the digital paradigm?
Yes. Well, first I'd like to say something. I'm pretty sure you all know about this. The concept of a single entity of value in the digital world doesn't apply that same way as in the physical world, right? I've always used to joke with this back when there was another general director at the National Archive. I always said, if the general director of the National Archive would go crazy one day, she could grab a couple of scissors and go inside the National Archive, start destroying the documents, or a flamethrower or whatever. And I used to joke with that, and trying to say that in the digital world we have a way of getting multiple copies of the document, and those are all the same value and the same document we need to guarantee a process or to give it legal validity, etc. But the thing about disposing in the digital world is that, I'm going to say this from a computer scientist point of view, it shouldn't be as complicated as everyone thinks it is. Right? Because you pretty much just need to set exactly the same rules you have in the world of physical documents. Documents have a living permanency. I don't know how you say this in English, but there's like the table that you define the living validity of the documents, right? You need to translate that to electronic documents, and you can give the your system. You can give the system the responsibility of doing this by an approval of the archivist in charge, right? Whenever a document is ready to be disposed, you just need to send a message to the archivist in charge, and this has already finished its life cycle. Do you want to destroy it, yes or no? And the system should handle it. This is an efficient way of handling space in digital that you can have in the physical world, because documents in the physical world don't get destroyed one by one. We all know this. We wait a while and we build collections of documents and then we destroy them in batches. In the digital world, you can destroy them one by one if you wanted to, and have a very more fluent and more efficient process in the way. I don't think it's a problem at all. Systems can handle this very easily, and you can set up traceability all around your system so that you can guarantee that every copy of that document has been completely destroyed. And this is also safe because otherwise things like we had a problem back in our country with ransomware and stuff like that. Having multiple copies and knowing that you can destroy all of them at the same time can give you also some control on avoiding the illegal or not calendarized destruction of documents that can also happen in a system not that well designed. So yeah.
My question is, I'm Irene Shyman from State Archives and Records in New South Wales. My question is regarding the workforce capability. So it's, and basically for Vilde, I was wondering whether, because you basically said something about looking at the capability of your workforce and that you've identified some gaps in their capability or skill sets. What can you say is the basic capability or lack of capability that you found out, and how did you address those?
Technology, architecture, the privacy, project management. We have a lot of just traditional way of thinking of it not moving us forward, just doing how we always did stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we would have the same concerns and issues around people's raw capabilities. But, you know, I think the fundamental thing is around the readiness to change and to adapt. And, you know, that's the sort of work actually Denise and I have been talking about a lot, about how to help our people kind of get comfortable with change. Because it's not like going to be a one-off thing, right? It's not going to like happen, oh, you wouldn't just do it the next few years and then we'll never have to worry about changing ever again. This is like a constant thing about being curious about our work, about the environment that we operate within, and having the adaptability to either get some new skills or just to be open-minded to some new ways of doing things. So that leads us into that sort of innovation approach. But it's the giving things a go and experimenting, and that's probably the hardest thing, because I think we probably work with people who really want the answer to be perfectly well-formed and to know with guarantees that it's going to work. Well, we don't live in that kind of world anymore. It's far more complex.
I just wanted to comment on what Richard was saying, because when I answered your question, of course, it's not like filling in new people with new competency. It's also you have the people you have and you need to move them forward to yeah. So it's a combination.
I would like to thank again our presenters. This is a really interesting panel. Everybody.